So London Fashion Week kicks off tomorrow as the industry grapples with inflation and changing consumer trends. Now we're joined by Caroline Rush, the Chief Executive Officer of the British Fashion Council. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. There's a lot to talk about because
good morning.
Good morning. This is a huge industry, of course, for UK PLC, and they're going through a lot of headwinds. It's costs going up. It's, of course, doing trade. What, as you speak to a lot of these industry leaders, what do they tell you they're most concerned about?
So it's challenging times. It's been a turbulent few years. Immediately, it was just the cost of doing business and time, paperwork, post-Brexit. And that continues as businesses grapple with it. A lot of people have had to employ extra people, just warehousing's had to move to the EU because it was just getting too expensive and too timely to bring goods in and send them out again. So we've seen that jobs have gone, unfortunately, and have moved to the EU. So there's a definite impact already in terms of the industry in the UK, and there's a lot of pain being felt around that. And tax-free shopping, obviously, is front of mind. Rising costs, cost of borrowing, all of the things that put extra pressure on businesses.
I mean, do you lobby the government to try and get tax-free shopping? And if you look at the numbers, and we heard actually the Burberry chairman really go after the Prime Minister and saying, look, it just doesn't make business sense because people are, especially Americans, that spend a lot of money on luxury are just going elsewhere to buy it.
Well, I think everybody's going elsewhere, and I think that's the challenge, is that industry are seeing the real-time numbers, they're seeing the real impact. Of course, is that when we were during the pandemic and it was decided that tax-free shopping should go, it was muddied by the pandemic, but of course is that now tourism's coming back, is that everybody's feeling that impact. And for businesses that have retail in the UK and they have retail in Paris and Madrid and Milan, they can actually see those figures, real-time data. So, is that what we're doing is sharing some of that data with government so that they're understanding the real impact. And it's not just the international tourists that are spending more in Europe. So all EU countries have tax-free shopping. The UK doesn't. But it's the UK consumers. I think one of the businesses said that their shop in Paris was up 200% of UK consumers who are going to Paris to buy their luxury goods and basically getting a free weekend out of it. And what that means is that when you're looking to invest in retail, is that you're going to go where the numbers are. And of course, we want investment to come to the UK, we want the jobs in the UK, and it has a spillover impact in terms of hospitality, in terms of visitor attractions, museum numbers are down. We really need to think about addressing this, certainly in the next few months.
I mean, because it's a whole ecosystem.
It really is.
Is the Chinese shopper back?
They're starting to come back. Is that when you look at the numbers, I think we're seeing some of that. But of course, is that a lot of that tourism, again, is going to the EU. From a visa perspective, it is easier for them to travel to the EU. So why are we making it difficult? We want the tourism here. We want the spend in the UK. We want the investment from international brands to be part of our high streets to make sure, not just in London, but throughout all of the tourism destinations we have in the UK to make sure that that's thriving. So it's something that needs addressing really quickly.
And Caroline, and you've always, of course, lobbied also for more sustainable. You've always lobbied basically, the causes of the luxury sector to the government. In terms of sustainability, are we really making progress, or is it done in such a way that it's become prohibitive?
Well, I think is that from an industry government perspective is that the pressures on cost is actually seeing the need to come together and collaborate. So we're quite hopeful around the opportunity of having programmes that will look at industrial change within the UK and investment in some of the innovation and some of the infrastructure that's needed to actually get to sort of circularity ecosystems in the UK, which is what, that's the utopia. Yes. It's what we're aiming for. But certainly there's legislation coming from the EU. Most of our businesses trade within the EU, so we need to make sure that we are ready to do business for that. And in fact, I was in Brussels yesterday with my European counterparts, talking about how that kind of legislation isn't just about thinking about compliance for the fast fashion businesses, but we're protecting the creators, because a lot of the designers that are taking part in London Fashion Week, the emerging designers that are coming through are sustainable businesses. They're using upcycle, recycle materials that can be repaired, and we want to make sure that we're protecting those businesses and putting the creators front and centre.
How hard is that, when we were dealing with inflation? Actually, London Fashion Week also starts tomorrow, which is exciting, because after a couple of years of COVID, at least it's back, and in the physical form.
It is. So it's really exciting to have London Fashion Week back. Is that in February we had a full-blown fashion week of shows. In June we're actually piloting a new concept that we'll roll out properly next year, which is about celebrating menswear, the storytelling, the craftsmanship that goes into our brilliant menswear businesses, and making sure that that's not just for industry but for consumers as well, that we're able to tell that story. We have Fashion Week as well in September, which will be fully loaded and really exciting. And actually September Fashion Week, I think, is the second largest shopping moment other than Christmas. So we're really looking forward to that, not only showcasing our incredible designers on a world stage, but equally, hopefully, boosting those retail figures as well.
Is menswear, I mean, I don't know if margins are different actually in women's wear and menswear, but I feel like, you know, Savile Row and some of the savoir faire here in the UK is so towards menswear, but it gets a little bit less love. Is that fair?
Well, I would say that it gets less probably media headlines because they're not necessarily doing the fashion shows, but actually there's such a brilliant opportunity to tell the stories. As you said, Savile Row is known the world over for its craftsmanship, is that we have people that travel the world to come to the UK, and in fact many of the tailors on Savile Row go to international destinations and are there talking to the consumers. And there isn't a better example really in terms of sustainability. These are clothes that are built to last, to be adjusted and altered for many years to come, and it is something to be celebrated. But equally, we have incredible young designers, emerging designer businesses that are building a business on the world stage, that have fantastic sustainability credentials. And in terms of the UK, is that we're known for our creativity. In fact, creativity, I think, in fashion is a hallmark for European fashion. But in the UK, we're known for pushing those boundaries, and we're going to see some of that over the next few days, which is really exciting. And more importantly, we're going to be talking about the future of menswear and actually how the UK as a community can really come together and to celebrate that.
Yeah, and I was looking at numbers. Again, it's big business. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem,
today.
thank you.
Caroline Rush there, the Chief Executive Officer of the British Fashion Council. Now, coming up, we talk football. Lionel Messi is turning down a $400 million Saudi offer to go to Miami. We have the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News with Sarah Halls. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Francine. Bloomberg has learned that Donald Trump's legal team has been notified the former president is a target in a federal investigation into the handling of classified documents. Prosecutors have been building a case that includes testimony from former aides, including former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Trump says he hasn't been told he's been indicted and has done nothing wrong. The mayor of New York has told residents to stay indoors or wear N95 masks if they go outside, as smoke blankets the region. This as wildfires continue to ravage large tracts of forest in Canada, sending smoke more than 1,000 miles southward. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says it's the worst wildfire season in Canada's recorded history. Japan's economy grew more than expected in the first quarter as businesses ramped up spending. Revised data show GDP rose 2.7% annually, up from an initial reading of 1.6%. The data means Japan avoided a technical recession at the end of last year. The Bank of Canada has surprised with a 25 basis point rate hike, restarting its tightening campaign. Policymakers raised the lending rate to 4.75%, the highest in 22 years. The move ended the pause to hikes declared in January, with the BOC citing an overheating economy. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Sarah Halls, and this is Bloomberg. Francine.
Sarah, thank you so much. Sarah Halls here in London. Now, ticket prices for Inter Miami's away games are soaring after Lionel Messi announced plans to join the U.S. Major League Football team. Now, Messi's move is a significant blow to Saudi Arabia's global sports ambitions. For more, let's get straight to our Joe Easton. So, Joe, first of all, wow, Messi turned down a contract that would have basically given him $400 million a year. So how big a deal is this?
Yeah, I think it's a massive deal. I think that the negotiations with Saudi Arabia made it more high profile. Everyone thought he would either go back to Barcelona or go to Saudi Arabia. But obviously going to the US has come as a big surprise. But I think some of the contract details are what's taken him there potentially. There's talk of Apple potentially contributing towards some of his payment, and also Adidas. There might be hidden details in the contract that we haven't quite heard yet. That could be part of it, I think.
I mean, I know we're not like into the psyche of football players, but what would make him go there and not Saudi?
Well, it's already been done, I guess, with Ronaldo going over there. It's not a new thing now to go over to Saudi. There's talk of Benzema going there, even Kante from Chelsea. So kind of lots of players going over there, whereas a high-profile name going to the US, David Beckham was obviously a massive one, but that was more than 15 years ago now. That changed the league, and now it's time to kind of reinvigorate that, I think.
And then, Joe, we have a wonderful, wonderful piece actually looking at a breakdown of, sovereign wealth money, some of the private equity money in football overall. The former Qatari PM also sweetening his deal to take over United.
Yeah, so they're potentially coming back with a fifth bid, trying to outbid Ineos, which is owned by Jim Ratcliffe, the big UK billionaire that supports Man United. The Qataris want to get it done by the open of the transfer window, which opens on Wednesday next week. So they want to be in control of the finances before Man United start spending money, to make sure they know where the money is going, make sure they're within the fair play rules in terms of finance as well. So that's exciting. That could happen potentially, according to our reporters on that story there.
All right, Joe, thank you so much. So much going on, actually, when it comes to football. Joe Easton there with the very latest on potential bids. Now, bond yields are rising. Stocks are actually falling. Tech shares bearing the brunt of jitters over higher interest rates. Really, it's the unexpected decision by the Bank of Canada to restart its interest rate hiking campaign, which followed an increase earlier in the week in Australia. That continues to reverberate across global markets as traders are reassessing the risks of stubborn inflation. Coming up, as Rishi Sunak visits the US, we'll discuss Britain's global standing after its split from the EU. Our interview with Michel Barnier, the former chief Brexit negotiator for the European Union, is next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bloomberg UK. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, they call it the special relationship, and that's being put to the test this week as British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak visits America. Now, the UK is seeking closer economic ties with the United States. Sunak will meet President Biden later today, but don't expect progress on a free trade agreement. Now, the White House has maintained a freeze on talks, and the UK Prime Minister says a trade deal is not a priority right now. He says the focus is on making sure that their economic partnership reflects the challenges and opportunities of the time, and that includes support for Ukraine, responding to China's growing influence, green subsidies, and cooperation on regulating AI. The visit comes as Britain seeks to boost its global standing after Brexit. Now, let's unpack all of this with Michel Barnier, the EU's former chief Brexit negotiator, who's also now the author of a book, My Secret Brexit Diary, which we'll get to in a second. And we're also joined by Leslie Vinjamuri, director of the US and America's program at Chatham House. So thank you both for joining us. This is a big day, certainly for the UK and for Rishi Sunak, as he will spend a bit of time with President Biden. How does the US now view the UK post-Brexit?
Oh, good morning. And frankly speaking, I wish the best for this visit from Rishi Sunak to President Biden and meeting many people, key businessmen and in the States. As usual, there is a special relation between the UK and US. Very, very long in history and very strong. And once again, I wish the best. As far as trade is concerned, at the end of the road or at the beginning of the road, there is an economic reality. We are now in two separate markets, UK and EU. And the reality is that the EU market, single market, count 450 million consumers and citizens, 22 million business. That is the reality. And if you are on the side of the US or China or India, they know this reality.
Yeah, and Leslie, I mean, what the Prime Minister really wants is this agreement, right, which we've been talking, which actually we were promised by Boris Johnson. Will they ever get it? And if so, is there any willingness from the US to give something to the UK in terms of trade?
I think right now it's very clear that that sort of idea of a US-UK free trade deal has been parked for quite some time. But so I think what Rishi Sunak is trying to do, and quite frankly, probably President Biden is trying to do, is to find wins where there can be economic cooperation, whether it's that US-UK critical minerals deal, which would help the British automobile industry in particular to be competitive on electric vehicles, selling them into the US market. But I think the real economic win that the UK is looking for is this focus on artificial intelligence. So if Prime Minister Sunak can make an announcement about an autumn summit on artificial intelligence, really forge a partnership with the US and be seen to be leading when it comes to setting standards, asking some of the big questions about regulation, but keeping that space open for innovation, I think that's a really sweet spot for the UK.
But Leslie, is there something that the US actually needs the UK on? Does it need the UK on AI, or would it be throwing them a bone in return for something else?
I think we have to put it in the perspective that right now economic issues are seen to be security issues. And when you think about security, the UK is a leading partner across the board. So it's quite natural for the UK to be important to the US when it comes to economic security. And that means artificial intelligence, that means technology, clearly affected by Brexit. There's no doubt about that, but still with tremendous scope, again, for innovation, the firms that are based here in the UK. And so I think when you sort of put it in that broader light, which everything right now has got to be put in, whether it's with respect to competition with China, support for Ukraine, transatlantic security, that economic question is really, one pillar. It's very much integrated into that broader set of issues.
And Mr. Barnier, you negotiated very harshly with the UK. At the time, you'd warned, of course, the government that there would be consequences economically. Do you think Brexit has gone better or worse than you expected?
The Brexit is a lose-lose game. There is no winner. So it's a divorce. As many people know, the divorce is always painful and costly. So there is a lose-lose game, and we try to face the consequences. On our side, the Brexit is over. The Brexit is on the books. And we spend our energy, our intelligence on the future of Europe, much more than the Brexit. But I can understand that there is now for the UK to face the concrete and mechanical consequences of the Brexit. And as I said at the very beginning of the negotiation, 5 years ago, there is multiple consequences on every and each subject of the daily life.
But there's at the moment a negotiation, right, between the UK and the EU on car factory rules. The European Union has so far downplayed the chances of a deal with the UK on this. Do you think they will be a bit more friendly, as this government and the current Commission seem to be getting along better?
The point is not to be more friendly or less friendly. We face clearly and mechanically the consequences of the Brexit. And as far as the car industry is concerned, as far as financial services are concerned, Brexit means Brexit. You can be out or in the single market at the same time. You cannot dance in two weddings at the same time.
And I understand, but you can put the rules in a way that's more advantageous for both parties and not. That's fair, right? You can come to agreements.
As far it is for both parties.
Right.
But the task and the duty of the European Commission, the European Parliament, the Member States is to defend the EU interests. And as I said, we can face a situation where there is a kind of cherry picking in the single market. The single market is our main asset. The main reason why China or US respect us is the single market, which is much more than a free trade zone. It is clearly an ecosystem with common norms, common standards, same regulations, same supervision, and the same jurisdiction. So that is a single market. So we cannot accept any kind of unraveling of the single market, never.
Leslie, it is also pretty incredible, actually, to know that this is real quality time for the first time between a Prime Minister of the UK and a President of the US. Is Rishi Sunak giving the US what they need on Ukraine and also on trying to deal with China?
I think on Ukraine, certainly. I think on this broader question of Europe, the US is looking to see whether the UK is sorting out its relationship with Europe, whether it can provide this, convening power, some alternative space. On China, I think the UK is very much hewing to the US line, setting out, an independent policy. But when you read the details, whether it's in the integrated review refresh, the foreign policy strategy document, it's very much aligned with the way that the US is approaching China on technology, on the tilt to the Indo-Pacific, which has been achieved, but it's still very significant. So I think there is a real alignment there. But again, for the UK to sort of provide the US what it needs, I think demonstrating that it can forge a positive, productive relationship post-Brexit with Europe, that's the challenge for the current government. That's certainly the challenge for whatever government emerges after the next election.
But if President Biden has to call someone in Europe, who does he call first? Emmanuel Macron of France really tried to position himself as the person to call. Has that worked?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the U.S. has set up this Technology and Trade Council with Europe. That's one forum. But I think there are multiple phone lines coming out of the White House. And I think that relationship with the UK on security is very robust. Security, defense, intelligence, trade and technology, the security aspects of that, clearly Europe is extremely important, but I don't think it's either or.
How much has the EU lost because of Brexit?
We lost a key member state, and this member state is no longer a member state, is now alone, and I think in the global world where we are and what we face, it's better not to be alone, to be together. But coming back to the EU-UK relations, I spent 4 and 5 years on this negotiation with 3 goals in my head. Number 1, protecting the single market. It's for now and for the future. No cherry picking. Number 2, the peace in Ireland. Number 3, building the best framework as possible for the future relation. Because we have so many challenges to face together, UK and EU together. You speak about artificial intelligence, we can speak about terrorism, we can speak about poverty in Africa, we can speak about global climate change. There is so many challenges. We need to be together. It's the reason why I think that we can improve our relations, in particular for defense and security. Let me recall that at the beginning of the negotiation, I have proposed to Mr. Johnson to open a chapter on security, defense and cooperation with Africa, and he refused to open this chapter. Now it's time with Mr. Sunak to begin this negotiation.
Mr. Barnier, do you think there's a possibility that the UK would ever re-enter the EU, or is that never going to happen?
No, the door is open anytime. Anytime. The door is open. The only point I want to mention, it has, I don't know when, for the UK people, for the UK citizens to decide in total sovereignty. The point is to know at that time what will be the size of the divergence on the regulations for social regulations, environmental regulation, fiscal regulation. Because when you join the EU, or when you join the single market, you can be inside the single market, outside of the EU, as Norway. When you join the EU or the single market, the customs union, you have to respect the norms, the standard, the conditions of the EU. So the point is to know what will be at that time. I don't know when, the size of the divergence.
All right, Michel Barnier, thank you so much. Labour, of course, talking about building a closer relationship, so we'll discuss that shortly. Also, thank you to Leslie Vinjamuri there from Chatham House. And now we'll have plenty more, of course, on this special relationship, and we'll have plenty more on Brexit with Michel Barnier. This is Bloomberg. Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg UK. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, still with us, Michel Barnier, the EU's former chief Brexit negotiator. Now, Mr. Barnier is also author of My Secret Brexit Diary, a behind-the-scenes look at the talks with the UK. It's a simple read because actually it reads a lot like a Dear Diary. So you have dates, and there's one, Mr. Barnier, that really, stuck with. It's funny because every day you call, for example, Wednesday, the 6th of February, 2019, a place in hell, and it's a quite personal account of your Brexit negotiations. Are you a little bit sad about how it ended? And Labour has been talking about a closer relationship between the UK and the EU. Do you think that will happen, and what would it look like?
first of all, I wrote this book every day or every night to tell the truth of this negotiation, because I thought from the day one that it will be an historical negotiation. I'm sad about the Brexit. I didn't understand why a great country took such a decision, in my view, against its own national economic interest. But we have respected this vote and we have delivered the Brexit in the best way as possible. If it's possible to deliver a divorce in the best way. So I try to do that in respecting every day the UK, because I have lots of respect and admiration for this country, respecting my counterpart, but also defending every day, protecting the integrity of the single market. So whatever the future or the next or a future government in the UK will be, we are open. The door is open for any negotiation, but the condition will be, in any case, that the single market will be respected.
But where do you see the opportunities of working closer together on opportunities? Are there parts of the economy or defense that you think would fit, together nicely?
We can improve our relations. For instance, a very specific relation. I spoke about veterinary exchanges to facilitate the trades, but all the rules have to be respected. The paradox of this negotiation, to be frank, is that for the very first time in our trade history, 60 years, we have signed perhaps 50 or 55 trade agreements with Canada recently, or Japan, and we have negotiated several new ones. The fact is that for the very first time, we have negotiated a trade agreement with a third country, UK, to rebuild barriers and not to delete barriers. We have rebuilt all the barriers except the financial barriers, the tariffs, but we have rebuilt all the barriers between UK and EU because of the Brexit. So this is the reality, or the paradox of this negotiation. I think we can improve to facilitate the relations. We can improve our relation by a new chapter on security, defense, fight against terrorism. We can improve our relation for the cooperation with Africa, to tackle the new challenges about intelligence, artificial intelligence, and the new technologies. I think we have a lot of room to improve our relations.
Mr. Barnier, you also talk extensively about personalities, personalities that we've all followed very closely. Do you think the negotiation would have been different with a pragmatist like Prime Minister Rishi Sunak?
I think Rishi Sunak shows a goodwill. The reason why we succeed to finally, 3 years after, succeed to implement the protocol on Ireland with Rishi Sunak, and we lost 2 years with Mr. Johnson. So I think he's a goodwill. But whatever the government in the UK will be, we are ready to improve our relations, and we need to improve our relations, taking into account the Brexit, which is done, but improving our relation in particular for defense and security.
But do you think that had you negotiated with Rishi Sunak, the outcome of Brexit would have been different? The deal would have been different?
Rishi Sunak was a member of the government of Mr. Johnson. So I think the Prime Minister gave the line on the name of the government and the name of his majority. This is the same majority. I don't want to speculate about what would have been this negotiation, but it had been painful, but we have always been respectful for the UK, and I asked just to the UK to respect its own signature, which is not the case for Mr. Johnson about the Irish protocol.
In the corridors of power of Brussels and France and Germany, do people still talk about Brexit?
No. The Brexit is done, the Brexit is on the books, and we are, as Mrs. Merkel said once, the future of Europe is much more important than Brexit, and we have so many challenges to face, in particular the war in Ukraine, the stability of the continent, the new policy for industry in Europe, and to the climate change. So we have so many challenges to face, and what I wish is that to be more successful, we need to build a strong cooperation with the UK to face together such many of these challenges.
Do you think there's a danger that more countries in Europe will follow down the UK path and leave the Union?
No, I don't think so. The the consequences of this negotiation, very long and complex negotiation, is that now we no longer listen leaders like Mrs. Le Pen in France or Mrs. Salvini in Italy speaking about leaving the EU, leaving the single currency. But we have to be careful because the Brexit was improbable, even for the leader of the Brexit campaign, and it happened. And we have to be careful about some situation which seems to be improbable and it could happen, so we have to draw the lesson. The third chapter of my book is called A Warning. We have to answer to understand the social anger in many regions. It's too late for the UK, but it's not too late for the other member of the country, the EU. We have to listen, to understand, to answer to this social anger in many regions.
Michel Barnier, thank you so much for joining us today. That was the EU's former chief Brexit negotiator and now author of the book, My Secret Brexit Diary not so secret anymore. Now you can hear more from Michel Barnier in an extended interview on our podcast, Bloomberg UK Politics, also available to download from all of our usual platforms. Coming up, making Britain's pitch for AI, Rishi Sunak seeks Joe Biden's backing as he hopes to boost the UK's influence over regulating the technology. We'll explore that next, and this is Bloomberg.
We've seen the number of people with crypto assets double in the past year to 5 million. And we think it's important to ensure that the way in which crypto firms advertise to those consumers is clear, fair, and not misleading. So these are new, tougher advertising standards, and they're seeking to ensure that we treat crypto assets like high-risk investments, and that the firms are not able to just put out misleading adverts.
That was Sheldon Mills, Executive Director of the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, speaking to us earlier about tougher rules around crypto assets. Now, let's also look at markets, and a lot of the focus, of course, is on inflation. The fact that we had two central banks that surprised a lot of economists, and hiked rates means there's a global repricing on the impact longer term of inflation, what that means for the Fed and the ECB. Now, staying with the UK and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak calling for Britain to be included in the future of AI regulation. While Sunak is making the push ahead of talks with President Biden in Washington, a meeting which he hopes will boost UK influence over regulating the technology. Joining us now is Brendan Scott, Bloomberg's UK Economics and Government Managing Editor. So thank you so much, Brendan, for joining us. First of all, Sunak talking so much about AI, is he trying to get this as a win for the UK?
Yeah, I think he's looking for some sort of common ground with President Biden. The UK has had a hard time finding things that it can relate to with the US ever since Brexit. This is a new issue. It's one that he's been talking about for quite a long time. The debate over it has changed since he's first brought it up, but I think he sees this as a place where he can try to get something that works with Biden, get something going, and maybe it leads to other things down the road, like he would hope some sort of trade discussion, if not a trade deal. So,
what does it say about the state of the relationship? I don't know if it's, if this is the only thing he can get from the US, so as you say, trying to get in through AI and then hoping for more, or whether, well, at least, this is probably also the biggest challenge of our lifetime, so whether this is actually a win-win.
Yeah, I mean, I think as he sees it as a forward-looking issue. It's also the UK and the US security relationship is ironclad. It's one of the closest in the world. It's certainly among the top 2 or 3 relationships that the US has on a security level. The Prime Minister has set out on this trip trying to make it more of an economic discussion as well. AI is a security issue. It's also an economic issue. This is a way to bridge that. Yeah.
Brendan, thank you so much. Brendan Scott there, Bloomberg's UK Economics and Government Managing Editor. Now, also, listen to our podcast. For banks, AI is like having an army of interns. We spoke to one of our columnists, Parmi Olsen, and a chief executive that works specifically in AI. So we really look at the podcast in the city that I co-host with Dave Merritt, and we look at the crosshairs between AI, banking, and the UK. Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition continues in the next hour.